As a judge, I was investigating a fatal hit-and-run case until I discovered the dark truth about my husband, my son, and our family SUV, a story about justice, betrayal, and redemption. Judge Elena Weber thoughtfully traced her fingers across the new case file on her mahogany desk. Another hit-and-run homicide, one of those cases that kept her awake at night. The victim, Sophie Meyer, a young medical student who was struck down while walking home after her night shift. The surveillance footage showed a dark SUV speeding away after the impact. Elena sighed and reached for her coffee. Her eyes fell on the photo of her 19-year-old son, Lucas, a first-year law student proud to follow in her footsteps. Her husband, Marcus, a respected surgeon, had hoped Lucas would study medicine, but Elena supported their son's decision. The evening before the first hearing proceeded as usual. Elena meticulously prepared while Marcus returned late from surgery. Lucas was at a student party. Around midnight, she heard the front door open and unsteady footsteps climbing the stairs. She dismissed it as youthful exuberance. The next morning, Elena entered the courtroom with her customary authority. The prosecutor presented new evidence: paint traces from the accident site and fragments of a headlight. Investigators had narrowed down the vehicle type, a black Audi Q7 2023 model. Elena's heart skipped a beat, exactly the model Lucas had received for Christmas. When she came home that evening, she made a disturbing discovery in the garage. The right headlight of the family car was new, the hood freshly painted. On the driver's seat, she found Lucas's student ID and a crumpled receipt from a bar on the night of the accident. Her world began to crumble. During her nighttime inspection of the garage, Elena found the old headlight parts carefully wrapped in plastic under the workbench. Her hands trembled. After 20 years as a judge, always convinced of the clear distinction between right and wrong, all boundaries were now blurring. At breakfast the next morning, an oppressive silence filled the room. Lucas avoided eye contact, his hands clutching his coffee cup. Marcus hid behind his newspaper, seemingly absorbed in financial news. Elena observed them both, searching for signs of guilt or remorse. The silence weighed heavily on her shoulders. "I need to go," Lucas mumbled, standing abruptly. Elena grabbed his arm. "What happened that night?" Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. Marcus lowered his newspaper, his face a mask of concern. I don't know what you're talking about," Lucas stammered, but his eyes betrayed him. Those same green eyes she had loved since his birth, now filled with panic and guilt. The car, the accident, the medical student. Elena felt her judicial composure crumbling. Was it an accident? Were you drunk? Marcus stood up. "Elena, not here, not now." "Then when?" she shouted. "When I'm supposed to pass judgment on an unknown person while my own son." "I wanted to go back," Lucas burst out. Tears streamed down his face. "Dad." He stopped abruptly. Elena turned to Marcus. "You knew. You repaired the car." "What was I supposed to do?" Marcus hissed. "Watch our son throw his life away? He has a future ahead of him. And what about her future?" Elena pointed to the newspaper where Sophie Meyer's photo was printed. Sophie Meyer, 23 years old. She had a future too. At that moment, her phone rang. The prosecutor, they had new evidence, surveillance footage from another camera, clearer, more detailed. Elena knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. "Nobody leaves the house," she commanded, her voice shaking. "We need to talk." All of us. In the study. Only the small desk lamp was burning as Elena spread out the photos from her private investigator. Images from that night that she had secretly commissioned. They showed more than the police reports. Much more. "It wasn't Lucas who was driving," Elena said tonelessly, sliding a photo across the desk. Marcus turned pale. The image showed him at the wheel of the SUV minutes before the accident. "You picked him up from the bar because he was drunk." Lucas collapsed into himself. "Dad, you told me I was driving." Marcus's voice cracked. "You were completely distraught, couldn't remember anything. When the accident happened, you were asleep in the passenger seat." Elena felt her stomach twist. "You made our son believe he was guilty. For months. Don't you understand?" Marcus paced restlessly. "As a surgeon, a manslaughter charge would end my career. Lucas is young. As a first-time offender, he would have received a lighter sentence. A lighter sentence? Elena's voice was cutting. You were willing to sacrifice your own son? Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Elena froze. Commissioner Berger's voice came through the intercom. Mrs. Weber, we have new findings in the Meyer case. Time seemed to stand still. Marcus reached for the car keys, but Elena was faster. Nobody leaves. She took a deep breath. The door opened. In the hallway stood not only the commissioner but also an elderly couple. The woman held a photo of her daughter like a shield. Mr. and Mrs. Meyer. Elena stepped forward. You deserve the truth, but please listen to us first. What followed was a conversation that blurred the lines between judge and accused, between victim and perpetrator, between law and justice. Sophie Meyer's mother wept. Her father sat in silence with clenched fists. Marcus confessed everything. Lucas, now freed from the burden of false guilt, broke down. I'm so sorry, he sobbed. I should have known something wasn't right. Elena watched as Sophie's parents clutched each other's hands, their grief palpable in the room. Marcus spoke softly, his voice heavy with remorse. That night, I saw Lucas stumbling out of the bar. I was driving home from a late surgery and decided to pick him up. He fell asleep almost immediately. Then it happened. I saw her too late. I panicked. I just drove away. When Lucas woke up the next morning, confused and hungover, I convinced him he had been driving. Sophie's father stood up, his face contorted with anger and pain. Our daughter. She was working extra shifts to pay for medical school. She wanted to save lives, just like you, Dr. Weber. And you took her life and tried to blame your own son? Elena watched as her carefully constructed world continued to unravel. The next morning, she submitted her resignation from the bench. She couldn't continue to serve justice while harboring such a devastating secret within her own family. 1 year later, everything had changed. Elena stood in front of the small cafe across from the courthouse. Through the window, she could see Marcus with his lawyer, waiting for his sentencing. The trial had transformed everything. Lucas had suspended his law studies and now worked at a facility for accident victims. Their family's perfect facade had crumbled, but something more honest had emerged from the ruins. Sophie Meyer's parents had surprised them all. After the initial shock of truth, they hadn't sought revenge but understanding. Mrs. Meyer had given a moving newspaper interview, explaining that her daughter, the aspiring doctor, had believed in forgiveness. Sophie would have wanted something good to come from this, were her words. Together, they had established a foundation. The Sophie Meyer Foundation now supported traffic accident victims and their families, funded by Marcus's entire fortune. It was his form of penance, alongside his prison sentence. Marcus received an 8-year sentence, with confession and remorse, a punishment that Elena might have considered too lenient in her days as a judge. Now she saw the shades between black and white more clearly. You know, Marcus said during his last coffee in freedom, I always thought prison would be the greatest punishment. But the real punishment has been looking in the mirror every day, knowing what I did to our son, to that young woman, to all of us. The Sophie Meyer Foundation became more than just a memorial. It grew into a powerful advocate for traffic safety and victim support. Lucas found his calling there, working with survivors and their families. His law studies had given him a different perspective on justice, one that went beyond the courtroom. Elena often thought about how one night, one decision, could alter so many lives. She remembered Sophie's mother's words at the foundation's opening. My daughter believed that healing comes not from punishment alone, but from understanding and change. This foundation embodies that belief. The foundation initiated programs in medical schools and hospitals, creating support systems for accident victims. They established scholarships in Sophie's name for medical students working night shifts, ensuring safe transportation. Marcus's medical expertise, though he could no longer practice, helped shape rehabilitation programs from behind prison walls. Lucas eventually returned to law school, but with a different focus. He specialized in victim advocacy and restorative justice. Mom, he told Elena one evening, I used to think being a judge was about knowing exactly what's right and wrong. Now I understand. It's about recognizing that justice can take many forms. As Elena left the cafe that day, she encountered Mrs. Meyer heading to the foundation. They nodded to each other, two women forever connected by one tragic night. The morning sun cast long shadows on the pavement. Somewhere in the city, Lucas was making his way to work with accident victims. Life continued, differently than before, marked by the scars of truth, but perhaps more honest. The price of silence had been high, but the value of truth, however painful, was higher. The foundation's work became a testament to the possibility of creating meaning from tragedy, of finding light in the darkest moments. Elena looked up at the foundation's new sign being mounted across the street. It bore Sophie's name and beneath it, her favorite quote, "In the end, we are all part of each other's healing." The words seemed to shimmer in the morning light, a reminder that sometimes justice means more than what's written in law books. The story of the Webers and the Meyers became more than a cautionary tale. It became a lesson in humanity, in the complexity of truth, and in the power of forgiveness. Not the kind of forgiveness that excuses actions, but the kind that allows people to move forward and create positive change. As the city awakened around her, Elena realized that while her days of passing judgment from the bench were over, she had gained a deeper understanding of justice, one that acknowledged the gray areas between right and wrong, and the possibility of redemption through honest confrontation with the truth.